Hi, welcome back. This is Tom Andrews. We're sitting here in the office of Congressman Ron Paul. And Ron, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good, Tom. Nice to be with you.
There's very strict rules about what we can talk about, Ron, and what we can't talk about. We're in your congressional office, and I don't want to talk about a subject I really would like to talk about, and that is a certain political campaign. In addition to serving in Congress, Congressman Paul is embarked on a larger adventure, which we won't talk about in this segment, but I hope we can in the future.
Okay.
Have a conversation about it. But we're here to talk about Iraq, about Iran, what Congress is doing about it, what it could do, what it should do. And let me start, first of all, Ron, by asking about your congressional district. What district do you represent? What cities? Tell us a little about it.
I'm in the 14th. It's south of Houston, takes in Galveston, and goes down toward Corpus Christi. It used to be very rural and mostly agricultural, but now it's chemical industry and some agriculture. And I've been representing that area since 1997.
1997. Now, you have taken a very strong stand on the Iraq war. Why? Why is this so important to you?
Well, I gained an interest in foreign policy in the last several years. I came into Congress originally back in the 70s, and my main interest then was economics. I'm still very interested in economic policy, but foreign policy is very much connected with economic interests as well, because if you're spending a lot of money, you're going broke, it has an economic impact. Think about the consequence of the Vietnam War, guns and butter, and you know the 70s were a mess. And a lot of that is going on. So I did get on International Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee it's called now, with a particular interest in foreign affairs, because not only does it have an economic impact, but my biggest concern, overall concern, has always been for individual liberty. I want the government out of our lives, out of our bedrooms, and off our backs, not of our wallets. And with war, that's usually in a time, it's an excuse that people give the government. They give the government a pass. You know, if there's a war going on, they give too much power to government. It's notorious. It's just been traditional. It's not this administration or the previous one. It's just that way that people are more willing to give up their freedoms. And certainly this has been the case since 9/11. Oh, it'd make me safe and make me secure. So I have gained a great deal of interest in the war issue and strongly opposed the war from 1998 on, when they first passed the Iraqi Liberation Act, and because that's when the policy was changed, and I knew we would go to war, and I started talking out against it. It took 5 years before we ended up in war. That, of course, is what I'm talking about now, is trying to prevent us spreading this war into Iran. And so when that resolution came up on the International Relations Committee, not only was I opposed to the war, I was really opposed to the process.
How's that?
The process is that Congress no longer takes the responsibility upon themselves to declare or not declare war. What they choose to do is either ignore what a president does or give the president authority that that are not allowed to give the president. So this resolution was transferring the authority to go to war when the president pleased. I consider that absolutely unconstitutional. I don't have a lot of regards for the United Nations, especially when they talk about war. And one of the excuses for going into war this time was to enforce UN resolutions. So I strongly oppose the war. We were not threatened, and strongly opposed the process because it wasn't a declared war, and predicted then that it'll probably linger like the rest. We're still in Korea. Vietnam was a disaster. We're in Somalia still. We're in the Balkans. It just goes on and on.
And what do you say to your colleagues when they argue, well, we can't leave because we'd leave a disaster behind?
And I don't argue a whole lot with them. Yes, there's going to be problems, but it's not because we're leaving. It was because we went. So, yes, it's difficult to say that we have to leave when we know there's going to be a problem. But over time, there was a lot less problem in Vietnam after we left. I mean, we trade with Vietnamese now, and we go back and forth. We accomplish so much more with trading and talking with people than we do with force in war. The founders of this country advised us, don't get involved in internal affairs of others, and trade with people and talk to them and be friendly. And I strongly believe in that. I think that is the way we should go, and not think that we can spread our goodness by arms and force. And we've been doing that really since Woodrow Wilson said, let's make the world safe for democracy. And the 20th century wasn't very safe.
Right. Let's talk politics for just a minute, the politics of this issue. Needless to say, growing numbers of Americans are against this war.
Right.
Majority of Americans want the United States out as soon as possible. Large majority, at least within a year. What about your political party, Ron? Obviously, the Republican Party is arguing for something that's not very popular in this country. Why is that? And do you see within the caucus, the House Republicans, do you see shifts, changes? Is there discussion about maybe we're backing the wrong position here?
Well, I think there's been a definite change in attitude. I think it was an eye-opener to see what happened in the elections last year. I mean, that's what makes this place pay attention, is who's losing and who's winning and who wields the power. So, yes, the support for the president has been greatly reduced, and yet there's some that the hardcore base of the Republican Party is still strongly supportive of the president and would defend him. But the people are saying that enough is enough, and I think I'm probably closer to what the people are thinking. It's a little more difficult for me in Texas. I'm in a very conservative district, and it's close to the president, and there's a lot of loyalty to the party and to the president. So I have to present my case, on principle of the Constitution and why it's not good for us to do this. And besides, Republicans over the years have not always been as aggressive with their policy as they are now. Mm-hmm. And we, as Republicans, have benefited over the years, like Eisenhower campaigning that he'll get us out of Korea, and actually Nixon, even as poor job as he did, he was right. Running against the Vietnam War, and even in the year 2000, Bush was talking about a humble foreign policy and no nation building, don't police the world. So we have benefited, and yet we have flipped, and now we have become the ones that have promoted the war. And your question is great. Why do they keep doing it? You'd think, well, we've been set back, so the leadership hasn't seemed to have gotten the message yet, mm-hmm. where I think the grassroots have.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how that will manifest here in the House. We have a resolution that's going to be a supplemental appropriation. Of course, the president needs more money to continue this war. The Democratic leadership are putting together a package that they're going to introduce this week in the Appropriations Committee, be on the floor next week. Tell me about your views of that, what you know about the supplemental, and what do you see happening?
Well, it'll probably get passed. But it is interesting. Most things up here are done for political reasons. They give you something you like and something you hate and hope they can get enough votes to pass it. Yeah. It turns out that this resolution is not that difficult for me, because I consider the most important thing we do to reassert our prerogatives and our responsibility is, first, if we could, we should repeal the authority. But they're not talking about that. But the second thing that we can do and have authority to do is defund the war. So I'm for defunding the war. The other part about timetable, about when to get out and sort of micromanaging, I have a little question about that, because I'm very cautious about what we should be doing in our responsibility versus nitpicking with the president on how he should be the commander-in-chief. But we can set policy, and we can take away authority, and we can defund. And I think that's the most important thing. So it'll probably get passed, but it looks like I'll be voting with Republicans for a different reason, mm-hmm. Because they want to protect the president from any control the Congress is putting on him. And yet I'm disappointed that there aren't more Democrats who seem to be, willing to vote against the defunding of the war, and they're just as determined. And they, remove the phrase in there, the section that said that we ought to promise that we will not go into Iran without congressional approval. Why shouldn't that go without saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the Constitution. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. So they won't even allow that to be in there. And there's been some special interest pressure put on them to remove that.
Mm-hmm. So at this point in time, you probably vote against the supplemental. Obviously, there's going to be some rough sledding over in the Senate, as it were. What is your prediction? How do you think this is ultimately going to play out? As public pressure continues to build, as the day after day deluge of bad news from Iraq continues to come in, do you think that at some juncture in 2007, we could expect to see a growing number of members of Congress, enough in the House and the Senate, to finally take responsibility and end this war?
A growing number, but not enough. I'm afraid the end results of this debate that's going on right now, by the time it gets through the process, is they'll get the money, the war will continue, the war will spread, and even if there's some token effort to put a timetable on this for coming out, I think it'll be either ignored or it'll be so watered down it won't mean anything. That's pretty pessimistic, but the place to be optimistic is there's a growing number of people right now coming to our side, both conservatives and liberals, and I'm delighted with the work you've done over the years because you have brought people together, not just the people from the left, but you talk to us on the right, and our position is that it makes a lot of sense not to get into these wars carelessly. So that, the numbers of people, and that's why this internet is just fantastic. You know, I get a lot of good reviews on my efforts, but it doesn't come from the major media. It comes from the internet, and I get a lot of communication. So I'm optimistic that our message is being heard, and the majority of the American people are obviously with us. But Washington is the last place for them to learn. Even if they get the political message, there will be powerful special interests demanding certain policies, you know, whether it's oil interests or banking interests or whatever.
Right.
And that seems to be the hardest thing to overcome.
What's the single most important message for members of Congress to be hearing from people at home?
Well, I think the most important thing is that they're tired of this war. And hopefully the second message will be we should be very, very cautious about going into war, and we should follow the rule of law and never get involved in another war with full understanding by the Congress and by a declaration of war, and not go to war through the back door.
I know you have a vote coming
yeah.
up. One last question, Ron. Tell me about Iran. You mentioned, obviously, they've pulled the section of the supplemental saying that you need congressional authority. You obviously have a problem with them pulling that. Are you afraid that we're on the verge of a conflict with Iran? Do you think that this president could attack Iran?
He's not going to invade Iran because we don't have the troops. Our troops are demoralized, and the condition of the military is in bad shape, unfortunately. We're less able to defend ourselves now than we were 10 years ago. At the same time, I'm still very, very worried because we do have a lot of firepower. We have submarines and ships and airplanes and missiles, and if we want to teach the Iranians a lesson, we can do it. Right now, I think he doesn't have the support to do this. Even his advisors, the neocons are determined. I'm sure they would be willing to do it. But I'm afraid what will happen, there will be some incident that will occur. Contrived or accidental. I don't think 9/11 was contrived, but it fit the bill for those who wanted to go to Iraq a long time before 9/11. So it was a good reason to go, and yet Iraq had nothing to do with it. Something like that could happen. It could be contrived, it could be accidental, and the American people will say, well, we're not going to put up with that, and the president needs to go over there and teach them a lesson. And you know, shooting from the hip. And that's why it's so important for us to try to reach the American people, although they have learned now after 4 years that this was a mistake. Let's hope we can keep our country from making the next mistake.
Well, listen, I know you have to vote. I really appreciate you joining us. This is Congressman Ron Paul from his office here in the Cannon House Office Building. Ron,
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay.
Good.